Reverend William McRae.
Mr. Speaker, can the Deputy Prime Minister indicate what discussions have been held with the authorities in Northern Ireland where there actually is now individual voter registration? And if those discussions have been held, what lessons have been learned?
I understand there have been numerous discussions at official level to precisely learn the lessons of the way in which individual voter registration has been introduced in Northern Ireland, and we are seeking to reflect those lessons in the final legislation which we will be bringing forward fairly shortly.
Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's commitment to individual voter registration. What assurances can he give the House that this change will not have a negative impact on enrolments of students in halls of residence, where university landlords have traditionally auto-enrolled all residents?
Well, I think one of the virtues of individual voter registration, which is the reason, I assume, why the previous government was keen to introduce it as well, is precisely that there is an individual responsibility on voters, including students in the future, to make sure that they are properly registered. And I think as long as we make sure that there is, as I said, there will be face-to-face household canvassing still going on, there is no reason why this experiment and this introduction of individual voter registration shouldn't lead to an increase in the registration of students on the voter registration.
Bill Wilson.
Can the Deputy Prime Minister tell the House how the government made the calculation that the new police commissioners should earn £120,000 a year?
Mr. Speaker, the police commissioners' pay is something that I think is still to be finalised, but the key thing is, of course, that the elections, which will be held in next autumn, will give people a real sense of accountability over policing in their local areas.
Chishti.
Mr. Speaker, can the Deputy Prime Minister assure my constituents that their representations, particularly from Hampstead and Wigmore, will be fully considered by the Boundary Commission for England, and real consideration will be given to preserving community ties?
Mr. Speaker, as he will know from the legislation, the boundary commissions will be listening to all representations, and they have a fair amount of latitude in the legislation to listen to representations, including those which relate to community links in each and every area.
Dan Jarvis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Deputy Prime Minister tell the House whether he supports the release of all unredacted and uncensored government documents relating to the 1989 Hillsborough disaster?
Yes, I very much do. And I think it is very important that we get to see all the relevant papers. I want to pay tribute to the former Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, who I think did a great deal to create the panel in the first place, which will receive these papers. The only point I would make, however, is that it seems to me that we should first allow the families who are still grieving from the loss of that terrible, terrible tragedy to be able to look at those papers first before they are then fully published by the panel.
David T.C. Davis.
Mr. Speaker, 16-year-olds are not allowed to buy alcohol, not allowed to buy cigarettes, not allowed to join the army without parental permission, not allowed to serve on the front line if they got that permission, not allowed to get married without parental permission. Could the Deputy Prime Minister therefore tell me why it is that all those who wish to lower the voting age from 18 to 16 are putting about these spurious myths?
Well, this is clearly an issue which does divide opinion, I suspect, within parties as well as across parties. I'm personally persuaded in this day and age, if an 18-year-old can vote, then there is no reason in principle why a 16-year-old cannot. He has marshalled some of the arguments and examples about why he would argue the counter case. It's not in the coalition agreement, it's not a government policy as such, and it's no doubt something we will continue to debate.
Ben Bradshaw.
Given his earlier answers, what does he think the Independent Advisor on Ministerial Standards is for?
Mr. Speaker, his duties are clearly set out, but I hope he will accept. I hope he will accept that asking the senior civil servant, the most senior civil servant in Whitehall, to conduct a thorough investigation and to produce a report is something which his previous government did on numerous occasions, and is entirely in keeping with a proper response to the very serious concerns which have been raised.
Julian Huppert.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend has spoken about the need for infrastructure investment for economic growth. What is he doing to support investment in green infrastructure and the infrastructure needed to support the high-tech industry?
Mr. Speaker, we are doing a number of things. We, of course, retained the previous government's capital spending plans. In fact, they will go up in terms of capital spending slightly by the end of this Parliament. We've done much more than that. We've also introduced very innovative ways in which we can marry public capital and private capital to invest in our transport infrastructure, our energy infrastructure, into our communications infrastructure, notably the Green Investment Bank, the first of its kind anywhere in the world, which will use £3 billion worth of public money to leverage in about £15 billion of private investment in the green technologies which are absolutely crucial to our economic future.
David Winnick.
Does the Deputy Prime Minister understand the concern of many Liberal Democratic members in the House of Lords and elsewhere who remain dissatisfied over the health bill? And why is it that this measure is going through when there is so much concern, certainly amongst the public, as well as his own colleagues in the House of Lords?
We will see how my colleagues in the other place vote. In fact, I think the more people have looked at the bill, the more reassured they are that the purposes of the bill are ones which actually are fully in line with many of the reforms to the health service that the previous government introduced. Less centralisation, less bureaucracy, more control by clinicians and GPs, and a more patient-centred health service, and all the while enshrining and protecting the founding principles of the NHS, free at the point of use, based on need, not on the ability to pay. And that is the reason why he may feel that the NHS is in no need of reform at all. Anyone who knows anything about the NHS and realises that there are increasing costs which are faced by the NHS accept that it must be reformed, but of course reformed in the right way.
In Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Those of us who favour reform of the Upper House are concerned that there should be no slippage to the timetable. Can ministers confirm that the Joint Committee will indeed report by the end of February?
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to see that I have an ally on this issue on his benches, and I hope he will communicate his enthusiasm for reform of the other place across all of the benches behind him on either side of him. The committee has indeed been asked to report by the end of February next year. That will allow us then to present the legislation in a timely way, and I very much hope the committee will be able to meet that timeline.
Mr. Speaker, further to question 7, is the Deputy Prime Minister seriously arguing that the removal of compulsion to register will increase the number of voters in Britain? I mean, we all know he's not the sharpest tool in the box, but that's a pretty bizarre conclusion.
Speaker, I don't know how many times I need to say this. There is no removal of compulsion. The offence on households about whether they give information on registration remains on the statute book and will not change. The only concern that's been raised, I know he and all his colleagues have chosen to misinterpret this utterly, was about the opt-out, was about the proposed opt-out. The Electoral Commission raised concerns about that, not about compulsion. And I've been very open in saying we've listened to those concerns, we are sympathetic to those concerns, and we reflect those concerns in the final legislation. He may choose, if he wishes to grab the wrong end of the stick time and time and time again. We're trying to do the right thing.